At 11:30 hours on December 22, 1944, 4 German officers walked toward the American lines at Bastogne carrying a white flag. They carried a typed letter, an ultimatum: surrender or die. Behind them, 55,000 German soldiers waited with tanks, artillery, and orders to destroy the town. Ahead of them, 18,000 American paratroopers were surrounded. Cut off, out of ammunition, out of medical supplies, out of hope. The Germans had given the Americans 2 hours to decide: surrender with honor or be annihilated. Generalleutnant Heinrich von Lüttwitz stood in his command post 3 miles away. He was certain the Americans would surrender. No rational commander would refuse. The situation was hopeless. In 2 hours, he would receive a response that would confuse him for the rest of his life. 1 word, 4 letters. A message so strange that German officers would spend decades trying to understand what it meant. The American commander was Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, 46 years old, acting division commander of the 101st Airborne. He had been surrounded for 6 days. His men were freezing, they were starving, they were dying. And when he read the German surrender demand, Anthony McAuliffe said 1 word that would become the most famous response in American military history: nuts! This is the story of how 18,000 surrounded Americans refused to surrender to 55,000 Germans, and how the Germans, despite winning every tactical advantage, could never understand why the Americans would not quit. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. At 05:30 hours, 200,000 German soldiers attacked along an 80-mile front. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last major offensive of the war. The goal was to split the Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The attack caught the Americans completely by surprise. German artillery shells screamed through the pre-dawn darkness. Tanks rolled through the snow-covered forests. Infantry advanced in massive waves. The American forces in the Ardennes were a mix of green troops and exhausted veterans. They had not expected an attack. Intelligence had said the Germans were finished. The war was supposed to be almost over. They were wrong. Within hours, German forces had broken through American lines in multiple places. Entire regiments were surrounded or destroyed. Communications broke down. Supply lines were cut. American units retreated in chaos. In the small Belgian town of Bastogne, American commanders looked at their maps and realized something terrible. Bastogne sat at the intersection of 7 major roads. Every route through the Ardennes ran through this one town. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the movement of armies. The Germans knew this. They needed Bastogne to move their tanks and supplies forward. Without it, their entire offensive would stall. The Americans knew this too. If they could hold Bastogne, they could stop the German advance. But holding it would require troops, and fast. On December 18th, the 101st Airborne Division received emergency orders. Move to Bastogne immediately. Hold the town at all costs. The 101st Airborne were paratroopers, elite infantry. They had jumped into Normandy on D-Day. They had fought through Holland during Operation Market Garden. They were exhausted. They needed rest. They needed replacements. Instead, they got orders to move into a collapsing front, with almost no preparation. The division's commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was in the United States on leave. His deputy commander was in England. That left Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe as the acting commander. McAuliffe was not what anyone expected in a general. He was an artillery officer, not an infantryman. He was quiet. He was methodical. He did not give inspiring speeches or dramatic orders. His soldiers called him Old Croc because he was 46 years old in an army of 20-year-olds. McAuliffe loaded his division onto trucks and moved toward Bastogne. They arrived on December 19th. The situation was already deteriorating. German forces were advancing from 3 directions. American units were streaming through Bastogne in retreat. McAuliffe set up his command post in a stone building in the center of town. He looked at his maps. He counted his troops. He assessed his supplies. The numbers were not good. The 101st Airborne had approximately 11,000 men. Additional units brought the total American force to about 18,000. They had limited artillery. They had almost no tanks. Their winter clothing was inadequate. Many men were still wearing the light uniforms they had in Holland. Medical supplies were critically low. Ammunition was limited. Food was running short. And the Germans were coming from all sides. By December 20th, Bastogne was completely surrounded. German forces had closed the ring. No supplies could get in. No reinforcements could arrive. The Americans were trapped. Generalleutnant Heinrich von Lüttwitz commanded the German forces attacking Bastogne. He was 53 years old, a professional soldier from an aristocratic Prussian family. He had fought in World War I. He knew warfare. Von Lüttwitz looked at the situation around Bastogne and felt confident. His forces outnumbered the Americans 3-1. He had tanks. He had artillery. He had supply lines. The Americans had nothing. Standard military doctrine was clear. A surrounded force should surrender once the situation becomes hopeless. There was no shame in it. It was the rational choice. Von Lüttwitz expected the Americans to see reason. He did not understand American paratroopers. The 101st Airborne had a culture that was different from regular infantry. Paratroopers were volunteers. They had gone through brutal training. They had jumped out of airplanes into enemy territory on D-Day. They had fought surrounded before. Being surrounded was not new to them. It was just another Tuesday. On December 21st, German forces began probing attacks on the American perimeter. They hit from the north. They hit from the east. They hit from the south. The Americans held. German artillery pounded Bastogne constantly. Shells fell on the town throughout the day and night. Buildings collapsed. Fires burned. Civilians huddled in basements while soldiers fought in the streets. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow covered everything. Men fought with frozen hands. Weapons jammed in the cold. Medical supplies froze solid. German commanders watched the American defenses through binoculars. They expected the Americans to break, to run, to surrender. The Americans did not break. They did not run. They held their positions. Von Lüttwitz was puzzled. Why were these paratroopers still fighting? The situation was hopeless. Any rational commander would see that. On the night of December 21st, von Lüttwitz made a decision. He would offer the Americans honorable terms. They could surrender with dignity. Their men would be treated as prisoners of war according to the Geneva Convention. No one else had to die. It was the civilized thing to do. Von Lüttwitz drafted a formal surrender ultimatum. It was typed in English. It was polite. It was professional. The letter explained the American situation clearly. They were surrounded. They had no hope of relief. Continued resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties. The letter concluded with a deadline. The Americans had 2 hours to respond. On the morning of December 22nd, 4 German officers approached the American lines carrying a white flag. They were met by American soldiers who blindfolded them and brought them to a company command post. The German officers handed over their letter. An American lieutenant read it and immediately sent it up the chain of command. The letter reached McAuliffe's headquarters at approximately 1130 hours. McAuliffe was in another building dealing with artillery positions when his operations officer handed him the German ultimatum. McAuliffe read it once, he read it again. Then he laughed. "Ah, nuts," he said. The staff officers in the room looked at each other. They knew that expression. McAuliffe said, "Nuts," when something was ridiculous, when something was absurd, when something was not worth serious consideration. But the Germans were waiting for a formal response. They needed something in writing. McAuliffe's operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard, suggested they send back exactly what McAuliffe had said. "You mean nuts?" McAuliffe asked. "That's it," Kinnard replied. McAuliffe thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. Then he nodded. "It's true. That's what I said." Someone handed him a piece of paper. McAuliffe wrote out the response in his own hand. The entire message consisted of 4 paragraphs. The first paragraph addressed the German commander. The second paragraph contained one word: nuts. The third paragraph was the signature. The fourth paragraph listed McAuliffe's rank and position. That was it. The complete response to a formal surrender ultimatum from 55,000 German soldiers was one word: nuts. The American officers who had to deliver this response were not sure how to explain it to the Germans. The German officers were still waiting at the front line, blindfolded. Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, was given the task of delivering McAuliffe's response. Harper took the typed reply and walked to where the German officers waited. Harper had the blindfolds removed. He handed the paper to the senior German officer, a major. The German major read it. He looked confused. He read it again. He looked at Harper. "What does this mean?" he asked in English. Harper thought about how to explain American slang to a Prussian officer. "It means you can go to hell," Harper said. The German major's face went red. This was not how military correspondence worked. This was not professional. This was insulting. "If you do not surrender, we will destroy you," the major said. Harper smiled. "We will kill every one of your soldiers trying." The German officers were escorted back to their lines. They returned to von Lüttwitz's headquarters and reported what had happened. Von Lüttwitz read McAuliffe's response. He read it multiple times. He called over his intelligence officers. "What does nuts mean?" he asked. Nobody was certain. German-English dictionaries defined nuts as a food item: tree nuts, walnuts, peanuts. That made no sense in this context. Some officers suggested it was American military code. Perhaps it meant something specific. A signal to other American units. A hidden message. Von Lüttwitz's chief of staff suggested it meant the Americans were insane. Nuts could mean crazy, mad. Perhaps the American commander had lost his mind from the stress. Von Lüttwitz did not believe that. McAuliffe's response, whatever it meant, was deliberate. It was a refusal to surrender. But why? The Americans had no chance. They were doomed. Von Lüttwitz could not understand the American mindset. In European military tradition, there was honor in knowing when you were beaten. There was dignity in surrender when the situation was hopeless. These Americans did not seem to understand that. If you want to see what happened next, please hit that like button. Every like helps this story reach more viewers. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Bastogne. December 22nd, late afternoon. Bastogne perimeter. German artillery increased its bombardment after receiving McAuliffe's response. Shells fell on American positions every few minutes. The sound was constant. The ground shook. The air filled with smoke and the smell of explosives. American soldiers dug deeper into their foxholes. They piled snow on top for insulation. They shared body heat to survive the freezing temperatures. Medical supplies were now critically low. The 101st Airborne's chief surgeon reported that he had enough morphine for maybe 50 more casualties. After that, wounded men would have to endure pain with nothing to ease it. Ammunition was rationed. Soldiers were ordered to only fire when they had clear targets. No wasted shots. Every bullet counted. Food was reduced to 1 meal per day. Some units were down to half rations. And the Germans kept attacking. On December 23rd, the weather cleared for the first time in days. The clouds broke, the sun came out, and American soldiers looked up at the sky and saw the most beautiful sight of their lives. C-47 transport planes. Hundreds of them. The Air Force had finally gotten through. Supply drops began falling on Bastogne. Parachutes filled the sky. Ammunition, medical supplies, food, winter clothing. Not everything landed inside American lines. Some supplies fell into German-controlled areas. But enough got through to make a difference. German anti-aircraft guns opened fire on the transport planes. Several were hit. Some crashed. But the drops continued. Von Lüttwitz watched from his command post and realized the situation had changed. The Americans were being resupplied. His chance to starve them into submission was gone. He needed to attack now, before the Americans could consolidate, before they could organize their defenses. On Christmas Eve, von Lüttwitz ordered a major assault. German tanks and infantry hit the American perimeter from multiple directions. The fighting was brutal. Hand-to-hand combat in some places. Men died in foxholes. Tanks burned in the snow. The Germans broke through in several locations. American positions bent. Some units fell back. For a few hours it looked like Bastogne might fall, but the paratroopers held. American artillery, now restocked with ammunition, fired constantly. German tanks that broke through were destroyed by bazookas and anti-tank guns. Infantry counterattacks pushed the Germans back. By midnight on Christmas Eve, the German assault had failed. They had lost 18 tanks. They had suffered more than 600 casualties. The Americans still held Bastogne. Von Lüttwitz could not understand it. His forces had numerical superiority. They had better equipment. They had broken through the perimeter. But these Americans would not quit. On Christmas Day, 1944, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow fell again. Both sides paused to observe the holiday as much as conditions allowed. American soldiers sang Christmas carols in their foxholes. They shared what little food they had. Some units held brief religious services. German soldiers did the same in their positions. They sang Silent Night in German. They thought about home. They wondered how much longer this war would last. In his command post, von Lüttwitz reviewed his casualty reports. In 8 days of fighting, his forces had lost more than 2,000 men killed or wounded. They had destroyed dozens of tanks. They had expended enormous amounts of ammunition. And they had not taken Bastogne. Von Lüttwitz was a professional soldier. He understood tactical situations. He looked at the numbers and realized something uncomfortable. The Americans were winning. Not by advancing, not by destroying his forces, but simply by refusing to be destroyed. Every day Bastogne held was another day the German offensive stalled. Hitler's grand plan to split the Allied armies depended on rapid movement. They needed to capture Bastogne by December 20th at the latest. It was now December 25th. The offensive was failing. And it was failing because 18,000 American paratroopers had said nuts to a demand for surrender. On December 26th, American General George Patton's Third Army broke through German lines south of Bastogne. Tanks and infantry pushed up the road toward the surrounded town. Von Lüttwitz tried to stop them. He redirected forces. He established blocking positions. But his units were exhausted. They had been fighting for 10 days. Morale was dropping. At 16:45 hours on December 26th, lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division reached the southern edge of Bastogne. They linked up with the 101st Airborne. The siege was over. German commanders watched American tanks roll into Bastogne and knew their offensive had failed. The window for victory had closed. Everything that came after would be retreat. Von Lüttwitz received orders to pull back. His forces withdrew from Bastogne on December 27th. They had been stopped, defeated, not by superior numbers or better equipment. They had been defeated by Americans who refused to accept reality, who refused to surrender when surrounded, who said nuts to overwhelming odds. After the battle, German officers tried to understand what had happened at Bastogne. Von Lüttwitz wrote in his official report that the American defense had been fanatical. He described the paratroopers as fighting with irrational determination. Other German commanders used similar language. The Americans fought without regard for casualties. They attacked when defense would have been more logical. They refused to acknowledge their tactical situation. These reports reveal something important. The Germans viewed war as a rational endeavor. There were rules. There was logic. When you were surrounded and outnumbered, you surrendered. That was the sensible thing to do. The Americans did not follow these rules. After the war, von Lüttwitz was captured and interrogated by American intelligence officers. They asked him about Bastogne. They asked him about the surrender ultimatum. Von Lüttwitz told them he had genuinely believed the Americans would surrender. He said he had been offering them a way to save lives. He said he had been confused when they refused. Why did they not surrender? Von Lüttwitz asked the interrogators. The situation was hopeless. The American intelligence officer, a captain who had fought at Bastogne, thought about how to explain. "General," he said, "American soldiers don't quit, just because the situation looks bad. We're stubborn that way." Von Lüttwitz shook his head. He still did not understand. Years later, historians interviewed other German officers who had fought at Bastogne. Their perspective was consistent. A German tank commander said, "We could not break them. Every attack, they pushed us back. Every position they held. These were not normal soldiers." A German infantry major said, "I have fought Russians. I have fought British. I have fought French. The Americans at Bastogne were different. They believed they would win even when losing was certain." A German artillery officer said, "We fired 10,000 shells into that town. We destroyed half the buildings. The Americans did not surrender." I do not understand this mentality. The German confusion reveals a fundamental cultural difference. European military tradition accepted surrender as part of warfare. An honorable commander knew when to stop fighting to save his men's lives. American military culture, especially among elite units like the 101st Airborne, was different. Surrender was not an option. You fought until victory or death. There was no middle ground. This attitude came partly from American culture itself. The national mythology celebrated underdogs who refused to quit. Valley Forge, the Alamo, last stands against impossible odds. It also came from the nature of paratroop units. These were volunteers. They had trained harder than regular infantry. They saw themselves as elite. Surrender would mean admitting they were not as tough as they claimed. And there was something else, something the Germans never fully grasped. The Americans at Bastogne believed help was coming. They trusted that Patton would break through. They trusted the Air Force would resupply them. They trusted the American war machine. That trust was not irrational. It was based on reality. America had the resources, the equipment, and the determination to rescue surrounded units. The Germans did not have those same capabilities by December 1944. So when von Lüttwitz offered surrender terms, he was offering something that made sense in his context. In German military experience, surrounded units were abandoned. Help did not come. But in American military experience, help always came. You just had to hold on long enough. McAuliffe understood this instinctively. When he said nuts, he was expressing confidence that was not based on his current tactical situation. It was based on faith in the larger American war effort. He was right. Patton came. The Air Force came. Bastogne held. The Germans had not understood this. They had calculated only the immediate tactical factors. They had not factored in American logistics, American air power, and American determination. This misunderstanding cost them the battle. After Bastogne, German military intelligence began studying American fighting methods more carefully. They produced reports analyzing what they called American psychological warfare tactics. One report from January 1945 described American troops as prone to emotional decision-making rather than rational tactical assessment. Another report said American commanders prioritized morale factors over practical military considerations. The Germans thought these were weaknesses. They were wrong. The emotional factor, the morale factor, the irrational stubbornness, these were actually strengths. They allowed American units to hold positions that should have been lost. They allowed American commanders to take risks that should have failed. And they terrified German soldiers who had to fight them. By early 1945, German troops began to specifically request not to be sent to sectors facing American airborne divisions. The 101st Airborne had earned a reputation. The paratroopers who said nuts to surrender were not people you wanted to fight. Von Lüttwitz's career effectively ended at Bastogne. He continued to command units until Germany's surrender in May 1945, but he was never given another major offensive operation. After the war, he lived quietly in West Germany. He occasionally gave interviews to historians. He always returned to the same question: why did the Americans not surrender? He never found an answer that satisfied him. Anthony McAuliffe received the Distinguished Service Cross for his defense of Bastogne. He was promoted to Major General. He continued serving in the Army after the war and retired in 1956. He gave occasional interviews about Bastogne. Reporters always asked about nuts. McAuliffe would shrug. "It was just what came to mind," he said. "I didn't think it would become famous." But it did become famous. Nuts entered American military culture as the perfect expression of defiance against impossible odds. The 101st Airborne Division made nuts part of their unofficial motto. New paratroopers learned the story during training. The response has been repeated in every war since. The broader impact went beyond just one battle. Bastogne demonstrated something important about American military culture. Americans fight differently than Europeans expected. They don't follow the rules that European military tradition established. They improvise. They take risks. They refuse to quit even when logic says they should. This makes Americans unpredictable enemies. It makes them dangerous opponents. It makes them very difficult to defeat. Von Lüttwitz and his fellow German commanders had calculated the battle based on rational factors: numbers, equipment, supplies. By every rational measure, the Germans should have won. They lost because they had not factored in something irrational: American stubbornness, American confidence, American belief that they would win simply because they were Americans. That belief sounds arrogant. It sounds naive. But at Bastogne, it worked. The lesson spread through the German military in the final months of the war. Officers warned their troops. American paratroopers do not surrender. Do not expect them to act logically. This fear was one of America's most effective weapons. Bastogne also changed how Americans viewed themselves. The siege became a symbol of American resilience. Nuts became shorthand for refusing to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. The story resonated especially with American veterans. Men who had fought in World War II told their children and grandchildren about Bastogne, about the paratroopers who were surrounded, about the general who said "nuts" to the Germans. The story became part of American identity. Today, Bastogne is a quiet Belgian town. But in the center of town stands a large memorial, the Bastogne Memorial. It honors the American soldiers who fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Every year on December 22nd, the people of Bastogne hold a ceremony commemorating the anniversary of McAuliffe's response. They remember the Americans who refused to surrender. And sometimes elderly German veterans attend. Men who fought on the other side. Men who tried to take Bastogne. They come to pay respects to an enemy they could never defeat. An enemy they could never understand. An enemy who said "nuts" when any rational soldier would have surrendered. The final lesson of Bastogne is this: sometimes the most powerful weapon is not firepower or numbers or logistics. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply refusing to accept defeat. The Germans at Bastogne had every tactical advantage. They should have won. They lost because they faced Americans who did not know how to quit. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Americans who refused to surrender when surrounded. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure the story of Bastogne does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.